So if I'm being honest, I'm feeling a bit too lazy to write up an intro this time around. Tonight we have 3 stories. The first one is about a staircase in the woods. It has a really interesting and cool spin on it that I think you guys will enjoy quite a bit. The other 2 stories are about some haunted houses, which both of them are pretty long, but they were extremely well written and they were an honor to narrate, so I hope you guys enjoy them as much as I did. A huge thank you to the writers for allowing me to share their stories, as always. If you'd like to send in a story of your own, the email is rylhstories@gmail.com. All that I ask is that it's your story. No sleep links are fine too, as long as it's, yet again, your story. Today is also my birthday. This should be going up on the 22nd, so if you guys would like to get me a birthday present, you guys don't have to, but if you'd like to, I would appreciate it if you drop a like on the video. If we could hit 1,000 likes, that'd be really cool. I'd really appreciate it. It lets me know that I'm doing a good job, and it also really helps with the YouTube algorithm, so. But yeah, I'm not going to take up any more of you guys' time. I'll let you guys get into the stories. I hope you guys enjoy them. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. A while back I had a friend, we will call him Ryan for the sake of privacy, who worked with search and rescue dogs and trained them for services with different companies. He always would tell me of the different experiences he has had and the different places he has gone. Many of the places he has gone most people have never laid a foot on, let alone gone out and explored. He got the job out of college because it was an easy into what he wanted to do when he got older, and his father got him the job with good pay. He never really liked doing it, and always considered it problematic whenever he would go out on a mission. Way before the stairs occurrence, it was just hard to go around and see dead bodies, lost people's campsites, etc. I've heard some brief stories on stairs in the woods, doors, etc., but have not actually seen them for myself until this time. This is a story of the time I went to pick him up from his work, and he had been shaken up by something he had seen. So we both decided to go out and explore for ourselves, which was a bad idea at the end of the day. This was back in around 2011, and he had been doing some search and rescue missions in a small town near the Rockies. I don't want to give away specifics, but it was a small town, with about 1,000 residents year-round. He had only been working with this company for about a year and a half, and wanted to leave because the town had a very odd aura about it. I will admit, every time I went there to visit, it seemed time never went by, and everyone was robotic and left behind from the times. This could be just because it was such a small town, so most of the time I just dismissed it as such. But in September of 2011, I was staying at his house for about a week to help with home improvements with his apartment to make his job there a little less depressing. We started working on everything quite early, and when he would go to work, search and rescue, I would work on things at the house and help clean stuff up. On most days I took my dog for a walk, and she would always bark at the woods. She never did that back at home, so I guess now that I'm looking back, that could have been a sign of what was going on. I went to pick Ryan up Monday night at around 9 p.m. when he finished his shift that night. Every night was different because sometimes he finished earlier, and sometimes he finished later than normal. He got in the car and was extremely quiet on the ride home. He told me that they were looking for a family that had gone missing the night before. They found the campsites and found all of their supplies, but didn't ever find a trace from the family. Even the dog seemed to be lost, and couldn't find a trace after a certain point. His dog brought him the furthest, and he ended up in a clearing near one of the tops of the mountains. They can only search so far on foot because of the terrain. He told me that in the middle of the clearing, there were these marble stairs, perfectly clean, leading to nowhere. He said his dog started barking, but he didn't feel fear. He felt at ease. He decided to go closer to it to get a better look. The way he described it to me was when he approached it, time seemed to completely stop, and he heard his mother's voice asking him when he would be home. The thing is, his mother passed away when he was 13. He said he froze, and the closer he got to it, the whiter and brighter everything looked around him. He said when he got the closest, his mother started screaming for him to come upstairs. He ran back to the group and ended his shift earlier than everyone else. After I heard this, I almost thought he was going crazy from living up here, and that he probably needed more human contact. I was worried about him, but everything else seemed fine. We got back to his house and ate dinner in silence. Then he asked me if I would please come with him earlier in the morning tomorrow. to just make sure it wasn't there, and that it was his imagination going wild. I told him as long as it wasn't too far, I would be happy to go with him. I thought I could have made him feel a bit better, and given him some closure, even possibly give him a reason to get out of this town. The next morning we woke up around 9, and decided to go for the hike in the woods to see if the staircase was really there or not. Me being an extreme skeptic, I really didn't think we were going to see any stairs out there. We drove out, got our water and backpacks out of the car, and started walking. This was when he started talking about his mom, and how when she got sick, it really hurt him because his father was never nice to him. He had talked to me about this before, but never in this much detail. It gave me more reason to feel bad for him. I knew he shouldn't be living out there all alone all the time. When we arrived at the spot, I saw it immediately. It was this massive pillared staircase that seemed to resemble marble, or some other white stone. The closer I got, the more I realized it wasn't clean and sparkling, but dark and old. It looked like it had been sitting out there forever, and almost felt cold. What else was there was a door at the top. It didn't match the style of everything else on the stairs, but it was a very dark oak wood, and it seemed to have pieces of moss growing inside the cracks of the door. When I looked back at Ryan, he was just staring blatantly at the door, completely blank-faced, not saying a word. I started yelling his name, but it seemed like no matter how much I yelled, the sound didn't seem to reach him. I walked back to him and started shaking him to try to wake up. He just kept saying he heard his mom, and she was yelling at him to come home. He tried to push me away to go up the stairs, but I knew that was probably the worst thing for him to do now, because I finally believed him. I grabbed him and pulled him away the best I could, and finally got him to walk back towards the path. He woke up and told me he didn't remember anything that happened after he looked at the door. I told him, and he got even more frightened. The next few days we didn't talk about it, because I didn't want to upset him even more. He had to go to work the next few days, and I felt terrible about it. 3 days later, they found the little girl from the abandoned campsite, but unfortunately, they only found her. Her parents and brother were still missing. She was only 6 years old. They had no idea how she survived in those temperatures for 3 days, nor what happened to her family. When they found her, Ryan called me to come out and talk to her till social services and the medics got there. They were a group of all men, and she seemed more comfortable with a female presence, as she wouldn't talk to any of the men in the search and rescue group. When I got there, she looked shaken up, but seemed perfectly healthy, without even a cut on her. The first thing I noticed were her piercing blue eyes when she looked up at me. She said, "Are you here to talk to me?" I told her, "Yeah, I'm here to make you feel better till the doctors are here." After I said that, her gaze dropped and she lost the color in her face. I asked her what's wrong. She said, "My family didn't come back with me, did they?" And she started to cry. I felt horrible and said, "No, they didn't find them." She said, "Find them? They went with me into the big man's house." My heart dropped. I asked her who the big man was, and she told me her and her brother went off looking for animals when they found a staircase. They decided to climb it and go inside. She told me she didn't even think about why it was there. Keep in mind she was only 6. She told me she thought she heard her mom and dad yelling for her to get down, and then she just remembered sleeping. I lost all the breath I had and could barely respond to her. I asked her, "Did they go up the stairs with you?" She told me she couldn't remember and started crying again. When I told Ryan, he freaked out and quit from the sector, and tried to make sure the girl was safe and kept up with her for a few weeks. When we told the rest of the search and rescue group, they never believed us, and said we were crazy for making a joke out of a family's disappearance. We even tried to show them where the stairs were, but when we made it to the clearing, they were gone. Nothing but the field that the stairs previously resided in. I haven't heard from the girl or where she is now, and Ryan has been working down in California, trying to forget about the whole experience too. Men fear death as children fear to go into the dark, and as that natural fear in children is increased with tales, so is the other. Francis Bacon. Surrounded by the reminders of my dearest friend's life, I sit on the rough wooden floor reminiscing about a lifetime of shared memories. I reminisce about the good times, filled with joy and laughter. The long nights where we would giggle until the early hours of the morning in that way children do. I reminisce about the milestones we had both achieved, venturing into the world as hope-filled new adults do. I pondered the more difficult times too. When she was there, as I brokenly cried in her arms after my first breakup. When we sat in my car outside her house, with the windows down, and a cigarette lit as she vented about another failed job opportunity. But most importantly, I wonder if I missed the signs. I relive that call as if it's once again 6:30 in the morning on a Saturday. And I'm wondering who dare disturb this precious time when I allow myself to ignore the world and sleep until the sun burns behind my eyelids. I remember slamming my hand on my nightstand, groggily searching for that elusive decline button before rolling over, and pulling the down comforter back over my head. I had just started to doze off when once again, the incessant ringing of the phone shattered the silence. Begrudgingly, I lifted my phone to my ear and answered the call. It was 6:58 on a Saturday morning, and my best friend was gone. Suicide, they said. My best friend in the whole world, my person, had taken her own life. I couldn't believe it. Didn't believe it. Surely there would have been signs. I would have known, wouldn't I? I blinked my eyes and noticed that my face is damp. I wiped the tears away with the sleeve of the college sweatshirt I wear. The one she bought me after the day I burst through her door waving my acceptance letter like a golden ticket. She had screamed in excitement with me as we danced around her living room, despite the fact that this would take me a world away from her, to the other side of the country. All she felt was joy that my dreams were coming true. I push away from the ground and start to survey the life she left behind. She hadn't lived here long, and it still felt like the home of a stranger. When her last surviving family had passed away, her grandfather, he had left her this sprawling Victorian-era house in the countryside. I remember how nervous I was to leave her alone in this empty Goliath of a home, when it was finally time for me to pack my meager belongings and head off on my own adventure at college. "Lena, stop, I'll be fine." Kat laughed with a broad smile on her face. "You won't even be gone that long. The year will go by, and before you know it, you'll be back here with exciting new stories to tell your boring old friend Kat." She picked up one of my bags and ushered me towards the door. "You? Boring? Are we talking about the same Kat?" I laughed as we stepped outside and deposited my luggage in the waiting taxi. "Oh right, that's you who's the boring one." She pulled me in for one last hug as she said this, and I fought back tears. "Promise you'll call me all the time, alright?" I smiled and nodded, and my promise was true, for a time. But we both were busy in creating our own lives, our own futures, and our calls became fewer and farther between. I am once again filled with self-loathing that the last time I reached out to her was over a month ago. She had clearly needed me, and I wasn't there for her. But that's why I'm here now. Amid the silence and the emptiness and the only tangible reminder of Kat, I hope to find some shred of closure to understand what drove my friend to this. I make my way through winding hallways and through a dizzying number of doors to the kitchen, needing something strong to help me focus through my grief. I open the fridge, reeling a little as the stench of rotting food burns my nostrils and forces itself down my throat. I gag and snatch the first bottle I see, before slamming the door shut so fast the contents rattle inside. I unscrew the cap and take a deep swig of the liquor, hissing in between my teeth as the burn slides down my throat and warms my chest on its way down. I plop down at the kitchen island with a sigh, remembering a particular phone call with Kat that had alerted me that something was wrong. Kat had expressed some troubling behavior, and I had been concerned that the isolation was affecting her mental stability. She had called me up one night as I was studying for finals, sounding shaken. Thinking back, I should have paid more attention. I should have been there instead of entrusting her well-being to a total stranger like I suggested she do. Kat, calm down. I can't understand you. What's wrong? Are you alright?" I asked, the beginnings of fear gripping my heart in its cold grasp. I had never heard her sound so shaken, so terrified. She took a trembling breath and let it out slightly before continuing in a hushed tone. Lena, I think there's someone here." The words caused those creeping icy fingers to snap shut around my chest in a vice-like grip. I shot to my feet, my stomach in my throat, the phone clutched to my ear like a lifeline. "Kat?" I gulped, trying to hide the shakiness in my own voice. "Get to your room, lock the door, and tell me what's happening.
Okay, hold on.
I could hear the soft shuffling sound of her making the way up the spiraling staircase. I let out a breath of relief as I heard the soft click that signaled the door was locked and she was safe. For now. Okay, good. Now we need to call the cops, okay, Kat?
No.
She blurted out, before continuing more softly.
No, I don't want to hang up. I can hear them coming.
I could hear her soft sniffling as she tried to hold back tears. It's okay. I'm not even going to hang up. I'm just going to call from my roommate's phone, I reassured her, gesturing frantically to my dorm mate for her phone. I called 911 and gave them Kat's address, keeping them both on the line on speaker. Kat, the police are on the way. You're going to be okay. Tell us what happened, I said, grateful my voice sounded calmer than I really felt.
I don't know what happened, Lena.
She stuttered, the tremble in her voice becoming more prominent. Just start from the beginning. I could hear her trying to steady her breathing, the soft inhales and exhales assuring me she was still there, despite her silence.
I was sitting on the couch and I was watching TV. I had it up pretty loud because you know how old houses get at night.
She began.
I was getting up to get some popcorn and I heard a loud crash coming from the kitchen.
I heard her choke back a sob again, followed by another shaky breath.
I ran around the corner into the hallway and I saw him, Lena.
At this point, the 911 operator interjected. Ma'am, you saw the intruder's face? Can you describe him for me?
No, not exactly. It was dark and all I could make out was his shape, standing at the end of the hall with his back towards me. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there.
She whispered frantically.
I hid in the study and that's when I called you.
Through the phone speaker, I heard Kat gasp before letting out a muffled sob, as if her hand were pressed to her mouth to keep the sound from betraying her presence from the intruder. Kat, what's happening? I whispered into the phone, my heart pounding into my throat.
He's in the hallway now,
she whispered, sniffing softly before letting out a yelp.
He's banging on the door. Oh my god, he's going to get in.
Ma'am, the officers have told me they just arrived and they'll be coming inside shortly. Hide under the bed or in a closet until they can get to you. The emergency operator relayed to Kat over the speaker. I heard the scuffling of Kat finding shelter, and for several agonizing moments that felt like an eternity we waited in silence. Only Kat's ragged breaths breaking the stillness. Finally, I heard the officers announce themselves from the other side of the door, and I let out the breath I had been holding for God knows how long. I rubbed my face and take another sip of the whiskey, running a hand through my hair as I try to calm my nerves back in the present. That call had taken place only about a month ago. When the police arrived, they swept the house and found no one. All the doors and windows were locked, and nothing in the house was disturbed except, of course, Kat, who swore up and down that someone had been in the house. I remember she admitted to me that this wasn't the first time she had experienced something odd. She told me she had had other odd happenings. Cabinets in the kitchen opening, items around the house moving, like the day she came home to a butcher's knife in the middle of her kitchen floor. Sounds she couldn't explain, footsteps and banging and other inexplicable incidents. I should have been there. I clenched my shaking fist as the grief is replaced with burning hot anger. Anger that I was the one who let her down when she told me all of this, when she opened to the one person she could trust. What did I do? Recommended her to a fucking psychiatrist. Because how could that be true? It couldn't, right? She was probably overworked and overstressed, and the quiet and the emptiness of her house was playing tricks on her mind. I can still hear the hurt in her voice as she pleaded with me to believe her, and of course I told her I did, but we both knew it was a lie. Thankfully, the therapy and the meds seemed to help, and she seemed to be getting back to her old, joyful self. I remember she would text me updates as we talked less frequently. She told me that she liked her doctor and was glad to have sought out help. She imparted to me that he had her keeping a journal on her daily life to help her discern what was reality and what was not. She didn't seem to take it seriously, but promised me she would give it a try. I shoot up off the stool at the kitchen island so quickly, I send it clattering across the tiles. causing me to nearly jump out of my skin. The journal. I smack my forehead with my palm and shake my head as I settle the stool back in its spot beneath the counter. How could I have forgotten? If anything was going to give me answers into what had driven my friend to take her life, that would be the place to start. I tear out of the kitchen and race back through the maze that is this immense house. I turn the corner back into the impressive entryway, with its marble floors and vaulted ceilings, and stop short as a frigid breeze caresses my skin. I haltingly turn to my left and see the front door slowly creeping open, the well-oiled hinges barely making a sound. I begin to take a step towards the door, my hand already outstretched to close it, when suddenly the door shoots the rest of the way open, banging loudly against the wall. I lurch back, wrenching my outstretched hand away from the door, as if it were about to burn me. My eyes, the size of saucers, stare transfixed at the door now thumping softly against the wall as it continues swinging. I take a tentative step forward, then another more confident one, before reaching out and slamming the door shut. My breathing evens back out as I slide the deadbolt home. You must have forgotten to close it all the way, silly. I tell myself to ease my nerves. It was just the wind. I shake myself back again before turning back into the house and making my way up the grand staircase. I rub my arms to chase away the remaining chill as I shuffle down the hall to the last door. I draw up short and take a deep breath. Kat's room. I haven't made it this far yet, wanting to put off this most intimate space until I couldn't anymore. Because I know when I walk in there, what I'll expect to see. Kat, sitting cross-legged on the bed, me at her side as we watch yet another Hallmark movie, like we did as teens. Or Kat's at the dresser, meticulously applying her makeup as if she were meeting the king instead of just a couple of friends at the mall. Or maybe I'll walk in there and see how she was found. See again what I witnessed when I went to identify her body. The police said they found her in her bedroom closet, hanging by a rope. I squeeze my eyes shut as if I can escape the image, but that only makes it worse as it now plays out on the back of my eyelids. I see her there, her limp body swinging, the creak of the rope that holds her only a few inches above safety, but more than anything, I see again and again the sight that awaited me when the coroner pulled back the sheet to identify her. He had warned me that it would be hard to see, but nothing could have prepared me. Her once vibrant green eyes were now bloody gaping holes. The skin so ravaged by her broken nails raking over and over and over. My eyes snap open, once again taking in the sturdy wooden door before me. I square my shoulders and reach a hand out to turn the doorknob, ready to finally get some answers on what had happened in that last month. I turn the cold metal doorknob and push the door open slowly, taking in the room. It really looks like she could walk in at any moment. The bed is meticulously made. The curtains open to let the feeble rays of fading sunlight in. Her makeup still lays scattered wantonly across the sturdy white vanity, and her plush robe is still hung from the peg on the back of the adjoining bathroom's closed door. I take a few steps into the room and stop dead in my tracks. There, at the other side of the room opposite the bed, the closet door stands open. The darkness where my best friend took her life, a suffocating void within. My breaths quicken, staring at that yawning darkness, and it's all that I can see. Slowly the sounds of my short gulps of air and the occasional creak of the aging house begin to fade. There is only me, standing glued in space, mesmerized by this macabre vault before me and the tomb of that vibrant girl I knew. As I stand there, I swear I can almost hear the creaking of the rope that served as the tool for that horrid deed. I feel my heart beating sharply against its cage, and I sense that this murkiness could swallow me whole in an instant. The creak of the floorboard as my traitorous legs began to carry me towards the closet breaks me from my stupor. An involuntary shudder creeps up my spine, and I hurry forwards to hastily slam the closet door closed. I lean my back against it and take a deep breath, chasing off the last of the discomfort the sight of the closet had caused. As I get my bearings once more, I begin to survey the room to determine where Kat may have kept the journal. I inspect the obvious locations first: the nightstand, under the pillow, the vanity. I make my way to the dresser and begin scouring the drawers, but quickly begin to lose faith. Surely the police would have taken something of such great importance, I think to myself. Having finally exhausted all possibilities, the light of the setting sun has been replaced with iridescent moonlight, and although the lights blaze brightly across the room, there are still lingering shadows that refuse to be chased off, claiming corners and crevices as their own. With a huff, I plant my hands on my hips and inspect the room once more. My eyes are drawn once again to the closet door. Sitting slightly ajar, I cock my head to the side and stare at it for a moment, then another. The one place I haven't checked. I'd done my best to put that coffin from my mind, but now it seemed inevitable. I squared my shoulders in a futile attempt to bolster confidence as I march up to the door. I seize the chilled metal knob in my hand and yank the door open. There, in the middle of the closet floor, sits a small blue notebook. Without a moment's hesitation, I reach into the darkness and snatch it up, then slam the door closed once more, this time ensuring it is firmly closed with a quick jiggle of the handle. I retreat to the comfort of Kat's bed, crossing my legs as I settle in to delve into the memoirs of my lifelong ally. December 3rd. Well, here we are. I'm not really sure how to start this, and to be honest, I feel a little silly, talking to a book, recording my every action. Ah, shoot. I've already started off wrong. Sorry, Dr. Trost. Let me start again. Dear Diary. Do people even still call them that anymore? Can't I just say, Sup Journal? You know what? Screw it. That is what I'm gonna do. Sup Journal? I find myself laughing, a small smile gracing my lips for the first time since receiving the news of Kat's death. This small reminder of her vibrancy and sense of humor is a soothing balm on the grief lying waste to my aching heart. With that smile still lingering, I continue. So yeah, here we are. Lena talked me into seeing Dr. Trost after my, episode. That's what Dr. Trost calls it anyway. A paranoid breakdown due to isolation. Maybe if Lena were here, none of this would have happened. Sorry, that's not fair to her. I get why she had to go, and I know why I had to stay. Stupid granddad, who by the way I didn't even know existed until his attorney showed up to tell me he bid it. I mean, a house is great and all, especially in this economy, but this house? I don't know. I swear I know what I saw. Oh right, that's the whole point of this journal. To document what I see and hear so that we can distinguish reality from delusions. Okay, Boomer. Ah shit, I forgot he's gonna read this. You saw nothing. Anyways, I guess I should document what I already know has happened, since it was real, Dr. Trost. It started out as small, dismissible things. One of the first things I remember was that things would go missing on me. I'm forgetful, but not that forgetful. Last week, I was sitting on the couch watching TV. I don't even remember what it was, some shitty documentary on cheetahs, I think. And I went to grab a drink. I know I left the TV remote on the coffee table, but when I came back, it was gone. I still haven't found the thing. I've had to actually get up and use the buttons on the TV like it's the Stone Ages. Then there's the sounds. At first, I thought it was mice, or even rats. I could hear this scurrying around above my head, and in the walls. But then the banging started. The first time it happened, I was in the office getting some work done. I heard that damn scurrying again, almost like footsteps running around, and I was about to start a phone conference. It was getting louder and, in my frustration, I yelled at those rats to shut up for 10 minutes. Productive, I know. I don't think it's rats anymore. Not 2 seconds after the words left my lips, I heard what sounded like a deep sigh right next to my ear. It sounded disappointed. Then the banging started, like mini hands all pounding on the wall behind my head, as if they were trying to come right through the wood paneling. I screamed. I was so scared I fell right out of my chair onto the carpet. I backpedaled as fast as I could, but just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. Then of course there's the incident. I know what I saw. There was someone in my house. I called Lena, thank God she's smarter than I am, and had the good sense to call the cops. When I saw that person just standing there, I was like a deer in headlights. All logical thoughts except hide were gone from my mind. Then when I was in my room waiting for the police, all I could hear was him banging on the door trying to get in. The police had the nerve to try and have me committed to the psych ward, but I know what I saw. They said there was no sign of forced entry. all the doors and windows were locked. But if that were true, and there was never anyone else here, how did all the lights get turned off except the one in the bedroom? Well, there you have it, Doc. Can't wait to unpack this next week. I closed the journal and let out a heavy breath. If this was just the first entry, I am anxious about what I may uncover the further I delve. Deciding I need a cigarette, I set the journal on the nightstand and venture back out through the house to the living room, where I left my purse upon arriving. I dig through the canvas bag, sifting through receipts and scrunchies, and other odds and ends to find the pack of smokes. I open my bag, scattering the contents across the coffee table, but still turn up empty. With a scowl, I begin retracing my steps to no avail. With begrudging acceptance that a cigarette is not in my future, I trudge back upstairs to Kat's room. I enter the room and pause before I have a chance to sit back down. There on the nightstand, right next to the journal, sits my little green and white pack of coffin nails. I glance around the room nervously, eyes darting between the lurking shadows. I could have sworn I left them in my purse. I swipe the pack off the nightstand and light one, taking a deep inhale to calm my anxiety. That journal is already getting to me. Keep it together, Lena. I resume my spots on the bed with the notebook, take another inhale, and chuckle dryly to myself. If Kat could see me now, she'd be blowing her lid, smoking inside like this. But it doesn't really matter anymore. In no time at all, this house will be sold, and the smell of smoke in the wallpaper and floorboards will be someone else's problem. I flip to the next entry in the book, bracing myself for what I might find. December 10th. Sup, journal? I wish I had good news, but I don't. I don't think I can even talk to Lena about this anymore. She'll have me committed for sure. So I slapped on a happy face and told her I like the doc, which I do, and that I really feel like this will help. Jury's still out. I think the meds Dr. Tross gave me are causing some adverse side effects. I think I'm starting to sleepwalk. I've never done this before, that I know of, but this past week I've woken up to find myself standing in front of the closet door, nose pressed to the wood. Same spot, same time, every night. Sort of a silver lining though. I found the TV remote, and my coasters, 2 candles, and my toothbrush, all piled neatly on the floor inside the closet. Maybe I brought them while I was sleepwalking. I'm not quite sure. I also seem to be having some memory issues. Nothing too crazy. I pause my reading as a faint scratching sound reaches my ears. My gaze slowly follows the direction my ears tell me the sound is originating from. Up slowly to stare straight above at the ceiling. Thud. I yelp at the sudden disturbance, my eyes glued to the ceiling as the scuffling sound continues. Damn rats, I think to myself. I shoot one final surly glare at the ceiling before returning my attention to the pages before me. Nothing too crazy, but I'll mention it to the doc the next time I see him. Yesterday afternoon when I came back from picking up some groceries, I entered the kitchen to see the butcher's knife from my block set lying on the middle of the floor. I hadn't done any cooking yet, and if I had dropped it, I certainly would have picked it up. Dr. Tross suggested it might be good for me to get a pet, that it would help me feel less isolated, and that pets boost serotonin or something. I decided it couldn't hurt, so I stopped at the shelter and picked up Shiki. She's an adorable little black kitty. They say black pets are more likely to be euthanized, and she looked just as lonely as I've been feeling. Hopefully we can give each other some comfort. I remember she mentioned getting a cat. I was glad she would have a companion, another living, breathing creature to help her feel less paranoid about being here alone after the incident with the police. I frowned forlornly, wondering what became of Shiki. I turned the page, eager to find out. December 17th. Sup, journal. This sleepwalking is getting worse. Hell, everything is getting worse. Maybe I am delusional. I thought Shiki would help me, and she did at first. When I came home 3 days ago, I couldn't find her. I was frantic, thinking she'd gotten hurt or somehow gotten outside. That damn door keeps finding a way to get itself open. Anyways, I tore the house apart looking for Shiki, spent hours ransacking my own home to find her. I finally decided to search my room, even though the door was closed when I got home, and as I approached the door, I could finally hear her mournful little cries. I tore into the room like a bat out of hell, following the cries, to find her locked in the closet. I I have no explanation for this one. This morning when I woke up, I was in the closet. I must have been sleepwalking again, but this time, I woke up inside. I can never forget the feeling of waking up not where I fell asleep. The crushing, oppressive blackness weighing on my chest like an anchor, preventing me from moving, breathing, screaming. I sat in there, immobile, for what felt like a lifetime before a sound drew my attention. It started as a slow, low scratching, building to a cacophony all around me in the dark. I scrambled for the door, finally spilling out onto the bedroom floor. The morning light a beacon of safety after the despair I had just experienced. Shiki is gone this morning. I don't know if she's still in the house even. I don't know how much of this I can take. I inhale unsteadily, taking a final draw of my cigarette before extinguishing it on the nightstand with a shaky hand. How could she have gone through this whole ordeal without talking to me? How would I let her down so much? I clench my hands into fists, trying to control their trembling. Then I hear clattering. I glance upwards towards the adjoined master bath, catching a glimpse of the inside through the ajar door. I rise from the bed slowly, hesitantly approaching the door. I reach out and gently nudge the door open before flicking the light switch and bathing the room in a soft yellow glow. I scan the room for the source of the sound, before I spot the unshut medicine cabinet. I glance down and spot the little yellow pill bottle lying atop down in front of the sink. I reach down to obtain the canister, checking the label. Pimavanserin. These must have been what Dr. Trost prescribed her. I frowned disapprovingly at the nearly full bottle. Was she not taking her meds? I wondered to myself before tucking the pills back into the medicine cabinet and safely closing it again. I shut the bathroom door behind me before once again situating myself atop the bed. Ready to find my closure, I flip to the final pages, taken aback at the state of this final entry. Cat's normally cute, rounded handwriting is now clumsy and careless. Dark smudges permeate the pages, and I can't be certain some of them are not blood. December 22nd. I can't take it anymore. There's something not right here, Dr. Trost. Go screw yourself. I've been losing time these past few days. I'm sleepwalking at night, during the day. There are hardly any times when I feel lucid anymore. I tried to leave, but every time I got in my car, I would wake up somewhere else again. Every time it's in that goddamn closet. That dark void is there, lurking, waiting for me every time I open my eyes. I fear that will become my tomb, that the day will come when I wake up in there for the last time. It's as dark inside as it is outside now. I woke up hearing creaking, quietly at first, as if trying not to wake me. Now though, the din is building, deafeningly loud. I can hear them, as if every cabinet, window, and door in this house is screeching open at once. The closet, it's open now. The void is beckoning me, as if into the tender embrace of a long-lost lover. I'm tired of fighting. Lena, I'm sorry. I'm so tired. I can't fight it. I know I've seen it now, and there's only one thing left to do. My breath hitches as I begin weeping openly. It's clear to me now Kat was not well. What had driven her to this madness? I press the heels of my hands to my eyes to stem the flow of tears. Then I hear creaking. I freeze and choke back a sob. No. That can't be. My heart stops, my breath coming in rapid spurts. The shadows lingering around the edge of the room seem to lengthen and dance across the walls. A frigid breeze passes through me, causing my skin to raise. The room is deafeningly silent, as if an audience holding its breath before the final crescendo. I haltingly lower my hands and raise my gaze level before me. Ahead is a gaping cavern of despair as the closet door stands open. My sister, Jacqueline, left for her honeymoon 3 weeks ago. As a proud mother of 2 beagles, she offered me a house to myself, a solid internet connection, and all the hot water I could use, not to mention a healthy stack of 50s, to live in her house for a few weeks and dog sit. I've got to be honest, I don't visit her house very often, and I've never spent the night. She'd only moved out of the family home a few short years ago, and still showed up to the weekly family dinner, so it's not as though I had much reason to drive out to see her. I headed over to her place after work on a Monday. Her place was a bit out of the way, so the sun was already low in the sky as I neared her place. The long, winding roads were all pretty unfamiliar to me, especially at this time of night. She lived in one of those outer suburbs, not what you'd call country, but the town was pretty self-contained, and surrounded by a significant ring of housing developments that weren't going anywhere fast. As I turned into her street, I found myself met with a wall of foliage on either side, giving the street an almost claustrophobic atmosphere. The leaves were all a deep golden brown. It was springtime, but in Australia, it wasn't exactly unusual to see trees that lacked cheerful greenness at any time of the year. I vaguely knew where her house was in the street, so I headed down the narrow dirt road, away until I saw the mailbox. It was a pretty, rustic thing that she'd built herself. Since moving out, she'd developed a skill for etching wood that had led to a number of artistic projects, and a mailbox had been one of the first. The words, 4 King Drive, were carved in a playful half-cursive hand across the top. She'd always loved the address of her house, as she said it sounded like a British person swearing with road rage. I pulled my little red Mini into her garage and headed inside to see my nieces. Jessie, a black beaglier, was standing on her hind legs, climbing my stomach wanting pats before I'd even set a foot in the door. Sophie, a purebred, was much more shy, and sat at the end of the hallway staring me down, as though questioning how I dare be anyone except my sister or her new husband. I was greeted with a short novel of post-it notes, with all the pertinent information I'd need, and most of what I wouldn't need as well. I skimmed it quickly for the good stuff, Wi-Fi password, and which of the 10 settings on the oven translated to on. As the night wore on, Sophie warmed up to me, which wasn't surprising as she did know me, and the 2 dogs seemed to go about their usual routine with or without me. They ate, they tried their best to steal my food as well, and Jessie took a trip out to the yard every hour or so to have a long barking session at nothing in particular. I set up my computer and spent the night playing games in the living room, and when it got late and I was struggling to stay awake, I made my way to the spare bedroom where I'd set up the bed. The 2 dogs both jumped onto the bed to join me, naturally taking up about 3/4 of it, and graciously allowing me to worm in where I could fit. Sleep came quickly and effortlessly. I opened my eyes to darkness. As anyone who has slept in an unfamiliar bed would know, the feeling of waking up in a room you don't recognize can be startling for a second or two. After realizing where I was, I began to wonder why I'd woken with such a start in the middle of the night. It really wasn't like me, as I slept like a log. My bleary eyes looked to the foot of my bed, and as I tried to focus on the doorway, I felt my heart skip a beat. A dark outline was framed in the light of the doorway. I wasn't exactly thinking clearly due to a mixture of being half asleep and being terrified, so I rolled to the side and grabbed my phone. Smashing the power button illuminated the room with a bright, artificial blue. My eyes stung from the sudden brightness, and as I turned to the doorway, I saw absolutely nothing. There was no outline, no movement, just a dark and empty hallway. Hell, the dogs were even lying down, with no indication they'd even been awake. Looking at the dimming phone display, I saw the time read 4 a.m. I rolled my eyes. I had work in the morning. I already had to be up earlier than usual to make the longer drive. Why did my brain have to wake me up and pull shit like this? I pulled the covers up, almost covering my face, and rolled back over to get what little rest I still could. The next time I woke up, mercifully, was to the sound of my alarm. I barely thought of the strange events of the night before, shrugging it off as a bad dream, the result of being in an unfamiliar place. I showered, getting ready for work. A few choice swear words were dropped when I found out that all the hot water I could use really meant about 10 minutes of hot water, followed by an abrupt hail of ice water. I got ready quickly, watched the entire time by 2 dogs who refused to move off the bed. As I downed a coffee, I headed to the garage door where I stopped in my tracks. My keys were missing. I knew I'd left them on the hook by the door. I mean, that's what it's there for after all. I looked around the few rooms I'd been in the night before and couldn't see them. As I headed back down the hall towards the kitchen, a flash of light struck my eye. My keys had caught the tiniest beam of light sneaking through the curtains where they sat, on the bedside table of the master bedroom. Not the small, cozy, spare bedroom I had spent the night in, but the master bedroom I hadn't even been in. I honestly didn't even think the door had been open since I'd been here, yet here it stood, a doorstop holding it open, as though this was the most normal of circumstances. I darted into the room, not wanting to spend one more moment than I had to in there. I grabbed my keys from next to the perfectly made bed, flew out the door, and drove to work anxious and confused. Was last night really a dream? Or was there someone else in the house last night? The thought of a stranger being in the house without me knowing sent shivers down my spine, let alone the idea that they were standing at the foot of my bed. If it hadn't been a dream, then that meant the dogs had been awake, which scared me even more. Jessie was friendly to a fault, but Sophie was reserved and defensive. If there had been someone at the foot of the bed and she hadn't been barking, it meant one of two things. Either they frightened her into a silence, or, even worse, she recognized them. I worked in a small factory. I dropped out of university after a bachelor's degree and basically just fell into the work by chance. It wasn't the most thrilling, just small assembly work. But for the most part, it left me zone out in a world of my own and be alone with my thoughts. That was all very well, but today I was lost in thoughts about the weird events of the last night and that morning. I just couldn't get my head around it. Sure, I could have dreamt the nighttime visitor, but my keys couldn't have gotten into that room so neatly on the bedside table. 8 hours of mulling over the same thoughts crawled by, and soon enough I was arriving back at my new home. The evening went by without anything out of the ordinary happening. Jessie was a constant companion, always seeking attention and happy to make a fuss when she didn't get it. Unfortunately, this often meant climbing up my leg and sinking her claws in until I patted her enough. Heading to bed, I almost ran to dive under the covers before the dogs could claim their spots. After about 10 minutes of being nudged, kicked, and stood on, I fell asleep in my corner of the bed. I found myself awake again. It was pitch black, and yet, instead of the crippling lethargy of someone who had woken in the middle of a good night's sleep, I felt eerily lucid. My eyes were drawn to the doorway almost instantly. The moonlight once again streamed down the hallway, and in my state of awareness, I was able to see more detail in the figures silhouetted in front of me. The shape in the doorway was slender. I would have said female, but I couldn't be sure. Around the pitch black of the shadow, the light scattered through long, pale hair. "Hello?" My voice scraped out, partially due to fear, but mostly due to the dry throat of someone who breathes through their mouth in their sleep. The head of the figure twitched slightly. It took me a moment to realize why, but they must not have been looking at me, but instead staring at the point on the windowed wall above my head, until I spoke and their attention snapped to me. It was then that I became aware of the noise, a guttural, rattling noise that sounded like someone struggling to breathe whispered through the air. It resonated deep within me, and I felt a shiver down my spine. The figure took a step forwards, and instinctively, my hand flew to my phone. I didn't take my eyes off the figure, but the instant the screen lit the room with anything more than moonlight, I was staring at an empty space. I sputtered, nearly choking from shock. There was a bulge under the sheets where one of the dogs slept, and Sophie's tired eyes greeted me as she looked up from the floor next to me, awoken by the noises I'd made. If someone had just been in the room, surely there'd be some sort of reaction from them. Had it been anything at all? Or was I certifiably insane? I didn't believe in the paranormal. I laughed at people on TV who pretended to talk to ghosts. I looked at the phone screen and felt my stomach drop. 4 a.m. Wednesday rolled by without incident. Well, without incident was being a bit generous. I still woke up at exactly 4 a.m., but I saw nothing that night, and managed to just roll over and get some sleep. On Thursday morning, I found a message waiting for me on my phone. My brother-in-law had left a parcel in his car, still parked in the garage, and someone would be coming around that night to pick it up. I replied that that was fine, and let him know what time I'd be home. On my way home from work, I drove through the town and rolled my eyes so far back into my head that I nearly crashed my car. Let me paint you a picture. Halloween really isn't a thing here in Australia, or at least, not where I'm from. Yes, people have parties and take advantage of the opportunity to slut up various occupations. But no, we don't trick or treat. I'm in my 20s and I've never known anyone who personally did it. I'm pretty sure the local schools warned parents against it with stories of predators and psychopaths, but whatever the case was, The holiday just wasn't a common Australian thing. So to drive through town at around 5:30 and see hordes of children being escorted through the streets was an unpleasant surprise that meant I'd have a regularly interrupted evening. Not in the least because a single knock at the door would set both dogs barking. I also didn't have anything resembling candy to give out. At best, there were a few family-sized chocolate blocks that I was working through. I pulled into the street, and with a little relief, I saw a few houses in the street had mailboxes with ribbons tied around them, and others had porch lights lit up despite the sun being out. I hoped this meant that my house would be clearly not participating. I headed inside curmudgeonly, and headed to the back end of the house, hoping the dogs would stay nearby and not notice anyone outside. I groaned when the first knock of the door came, as I realized I had to give the package to some person I'd never met before, and couldn't simply ignore the knocks. Sighing at the symphony of barks, I headed to the door to see shadows dancing on the heavily frosted glass. I discovered that it had no peephole, no hidden camera, and while the adjacent rooms had windows that could see the street, neither allowed me to see anyone right at the door. Admitting defeat, I opened the door, and had to smile and apologize to some preteens who thought wearing ballet outfits they obviously owned already was a costume. I basically shut the door on their dropping faces, but I really couldn't bring myself to feel bad. This was obviously organized by the locals. There was clearly signage for participating houses. It wasn't my fault they ignored that. Basically the same encounter played out a few more times. I was relieved that all the groups were accompanied by adults hanging back at the street, so there was no real risk of any actual tricks. As the door was knocked on the fourth time, I swung it open, already halfway through my apology when the words caught in my throat. It wasn't a high school kid in a half-assed costume in front of me. A tall woman was in front of me. She was rail thin, with dirty blonde hair that fell limply onto her shoulders. A tattered, white dress clung to her thin form. I was shocked at the depth of her costume. Her skin was made up wherever it was visible, tinted a pale blue, almost white. Veins had been drawn onto her, twisting up her limbs, so lifelike I would have believed they were real. But the most vivid points were her eyes. The irises and pupils were a milky white, and they were surrounded by a dull red of irritated and burst capillaries. They almost glowed red, and I thought to myself that the lenses must have cost a fortune. The woman looked straight ahead, a little over my head. She started to raise one of her arms in front of her, and I could see the radius and ulna rotate gruesomely in the attenuated arm. "Sorry, I'm not doing that tonight," I said, with more force than I intended. I pushed the door to close it and felt it nudge her outstretched arm. In the last moment, right before the door clicked into its frame, I nearly froze in terror. That same throaty rattling I had heard a few nights before crept through the crack in the door for just a moment as it closed. That same noise like a lung desperately trying to inflate, but finding no air. Survival instincts dulled my mind, and I flipped the lock, staggering backwards. I guess this was where I found out that I was more flight than fight. My brain was trying to tell me something, but the adrenaline made it difficult to be rational. However, when my eyes slid from the lock to the door itself, I realized what it was. Unlike every other time I had shut the door that night, no shadowy figure behind the glass moved away and faded. In fact, there was no shadow whatsoever. Either that woman had vanished so quickly that I couldn't register it, or she had never moved and somehow cast now shadow on the door. There was no goddamn way I was about to open that door to test the theory either way. I slumped to the ground, adrenaline leaving me for post-panic exhaustion to take hold, and I simply sat staring at the door for a long time, until the sun started to set. A shadow appeared at the door and knocked. I couldn't bring myself to get up from the floor, so I watched as they knocked again. A few seconds passed and my hip started to buzz as my phone lit up. I answered.
"Hi, it's Sydney, Rob's friend. Sorry I'm a bit late, but I'm out the front to pick up that parcel,"
said a quiet female voice. I gathered myself and said, "Oh yeah, I'll be right there." Waiting a few seconds so as to not show that I'd been right by the door, I grabbed a package from below the hooks which held all the keys and opened the door. A small, smiling woman greeted me and happily took the parcel. We made small talk briefly and she joked, "I thought you might have thought I was trick-or-treaters." I half laughed and sent her on her way. Still horrified by the events, I barely slept. I found myself awake every other hour, But to my surprise, when 4 a.m. came around, no figure stood in the doorway. No choking rasp filled the air. A whole week passed and no figure had been seen. Nothing out of the ordinary happened except for the nightly waking at 4 a.m. for no discernible reason. I was going to sleep earlier, so I was still getting a normal sleep cycle in around the event, so life was progressing as usual. I tried a sleeping pill, but other than passing out much faster and some vividly weird dreams, they had no effect, and I was still pulled out of the trippy slumber at 4. In early November, the blazing sun poured down through our charming little hole in the ozone layer. A heat wave spread over the south, and temperatures reached a searing 37 degrees. I cranked up the air conditioner, and it brought the house to a pleasant temperature. As I was about to head to bed for the night, the air was much cooler than the day, so I turned off the AC. It was humid in the bedroom, so I decided to crack the window for a breeze. I found it was, of course, locked. I walked to the front door and grabbed a fistful of key rings from the hooks, and set about trying each one in the lock. As far as I could tell, none of the keys matched the lock, and I couldn't even see one that looked the right shape. Defeated, I put the keys back and went to sleep with the covers completely thrown off. For the first time, neither dog was pressed up against me on the bed, as they too felt the muggy air getting to them. The next thing I knew, I was awake. I was awake, but my eyelids wouldn't open. Through my childhood, I had suffered sleep paralysis before, but never like this. In past episodes, my eyes would open, and my brain would repeatedly tell me I was getting up, as though I dreamt standing up and taking a few steps before snapping back to being in the same half-asleep state. Over and over this would happen until a delirious state of fear and frustration washed over me. This was different. I was wide awake, completely aware, but not a single muscle in my body would respond to any command. The quiet room was pierced by that horrid, shallow rattling, but it wasn't coming from the doorway. It was so quiet yet so close that it must have been coming from only centimeters from my face. That was when I felt it. The dull tingle of moist air drifting onto my face in unison with the tiny, hissing breaths. I could do nothing except lay there, motionless at that thing hung over me. So close I could feel every factional inhale and exhale shift the minuscule hairs on my face. It seemed like hours before I was able to will myself to slip back into unconsciousness. I woke in the morning with a start, shooting bolt upright in the bed, stifling a scream at the events which seemed to have happened only moments ago. I cringed as I felt cold air swirl over my neck, and whirling around I saw that the large window behind the headboard was wide open. I shuddered and tried to shut it, only to find the lock was still closed over and wouldn't allow me to close it fully. As I hurried out of the room, still feeling completely violated, my jaw dropped. Every window was open. The kitchen, the lounge, every single room had every single window open, and worse, every one was still inexplicably locked. I headed to the bathroom to shower before work, and the sight in the mirror made my heart thud to a stop. Tender, yellow-blue bruises interlocked elegantly around my throat. 10 bruises, one for each of those desiccated, pale fingers. I was a rational person. Ghosts weren't real. I tried to tell myself everything I could to calm myself down. Even if they were, surely a ghost can't just up and kill a person for no reason, right? 8 fidgety hours later, I made my way home with a few stops. Inside the house, before I did anything, I walked around every room, at every windowsill, and every doorway. I spread a thick line of salt. I burned some sage I picked up in a shifty little spiritual store. I didn't believe in any of this stuff, but I'd watched enough horror movies to know the basics. I tried to not let the little voice, which reminded me that in every movie where someone did these things, the spirit would come back even more violent and angered. The last few nights in the house, I barely slept. I was terrified that any moment I would wake up at the feeling of the life being choked out of me, powerless to fight back, or to open my eyes to see that gaunt, pallid face directly in front of my own. When I did sleep, the dreams were a blur of terror and horrific imagery, always punctuated by 4 a.m. On the last night that I spent in the house, it wasn't fear that filled my dreams, but some other darkly powerful emotion. It was a sick hatred and delirium that I had never felt before. I walked through the familiar frosted glass front door and dropped my keys into a small glass bowl, sitting atop a tiny table by the door. The images rushed and blurred, and I found myself in the kitchen. It was dark and I clutched a small, empty glass in my hand. Walking past a tall grandfather clock in the hall which showed it was late night, or early morning depending how you looked at it, I headed to the spare bedroom, only it was decorated much more extensively and resembled a master bedroom instead. A figure lay beneath the covers already when I entered. In another rushing flash, I found my hand wrapping tightly around narrow throat. A blonde woman's face looked back at mine, her mouth agape as I watched the blood vessels burst in her pale blue eyes, and her thin hands clawed at mine. The hatred boiled in my head as I squeezed harder and harder. Through the pounding of my own heart in my ears, I just barely heard two things. The first was a sickening, hissing rattle as the woman's throat collapsed beneath my grip, and she struggled for air. The second was the dull chiming of the grandfather clock in the hall ringing out 4 times. My eyes flew open, and I barely staggered to the bathroom in time to cough up a wad of hot sick into the toilet bowl. My stomach seized up for moments after there was nothing left to give. I sat bewildered on the bathroom floor, the icy tiles calming the blood pounding at my skin surface. I'd never felt such horrific loathing, and to see the life draining out of a person by my own hands was an image I simply couldn't shake. By the time my sister arrived home, gushing about her trip and cuddling her oblivious, adoring dogs, I'd cleaned up the evidence of the salt from all the rooms, and the smell of sage had long since faded, or could be passed off for bad cooking. I sat and listened to their stories, but I quickly made up an excuse as to why I wanted to head home sooner, rather than later. I fought the part of me that wanted to ask, so how did you afford a house like this in an up-and-coming neighborhood? I knew the answer, and honestly, I didn't want confirmation. I didn't want to think about it again. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. So I gathered my things, gave a quick, smiley goodbye, and drove home at a pace which risked a few $100s in speeding tickets. I'm not a paranoid person. I'm not the type to believe in ghosts, demons, or the supernatural. What I saw, and what I felt alone in that house, have shaken me to the core and made me question what I thought was possible. That alone is enough reason to put pen to paper, so to say, and get all of this out in the open. But if I'm honest with you, it's not why I'm here telling you this. I'm telling you this because I'm scared, because I don't really know what I'm meant to do next, because last night, I woke up at 4 a.m.